Hi, everybody. Welcome to lesson 4.1. This is the beginning of chapter 4. Chapter 4 is all about collective rights. We just finished chapter 3, all about the individual rights and freedoms. And today we're going to take a look at collective rights and what collective rights actually are. We'll take a look at our vocabulary as well as where do collective rights here in Canada come from. So stick around and let's learn something. Like I said in the intro, it is lesson 4.1. This is the beginning of chapter 4. Chapter 4 is all about collective rights. And we're going to talk about what collective rights actually are in a few minutes, because I know what you're thinking. Mr. Philblick, we just did rights. No, we did the Individual Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is a little bit different. The answer, or the question that we are going to try and answer in the course of this chapter: to what extent has Canada affirmed collective rights? And is broken down into this lesson today and the next three lessons, which are what laws recognize the collective rights of First Nations peoples, what collective rights do official language groups have under the Charter. That's actually going to be our last lesson. And then what laws recognize the collective rights of the Métis. There's a lot, my apologies, there's a lot of vocabulary words that we have here. Affirm, collective identity, collective rights, First Nations, Indian, sovereignty, annuity, reserve, entrenching, patriate, assimilate, ethnocentrism, Indian Act, Anglophone, Francophone, official language community, official language minority, publicly funded, inherent rights, scrip, and autonomy. Those are a lot of words, and we will be talking about all of these words. Now, you should recognize this document. This is our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Chapter 3, the individual rights and freedoms, is in green, and the collective rights are part of Chapter 4 is in red here. Now, our individual rights and freedoms are broken down into fundamental freedoms, democratic rights, mobility rights, legal rights, equality rights. You can go back to Chapter 3 and you can learn about those individual rights and freedoms. There's also two other rights and freedoms, but this falls under the collective rights of specific language groups, the official languages of Canada, and minority language education rights. And those language groups are for Anglophones and Francophones. I know many of you who are listening to this right now, you're in an English-speaking class, obviously, but you don't necessarily speak English at home, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But these are all part of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And like I said, we'll be dealing with this in the course of this chapter. So what are collective rights? Well, collective rights are specific rights guaranteed for historical and constitutional reasons, and they only apply to a few groups here in Canada. They belong to our Indigenous groups, so our First Nations, our Métis and our Inuit, as well as our official language groups, Anglophones and Francophones. And I know what you're thinking. You're in an English-speaking school, so that must mean you have official language rights. That's not necessarily the case. And we will talk about that in the last lesson for Chapter 4 here. Now, it's important to know that collective rights are different from our individual rights. Every single Canadian, every single permanent resident has individual rights that are guaranteed for them or to them through the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Okay, you have to be a Canadian citizen in order to have the individual right of mobility and your democratic right, but all of your other rights you have just by being in Canada. Collective rights, on the other hand, are rights that certain Canadians hold because they belong to certain groups within Canadian society. Okay, those collective rights, they recognize the founding people of Canada. Think about that for a few seconds here. The founding people of Canada. Who founded Canada? Our Indigenous societies, the Anglophones and the Francophones, founded Canada. So those are the originals. So that's where these collective rights come from. And we'll talk about our immigrant families as we go throughout this chapter. Those collective rights are guaranteed to these groups in society because Canada, as we know it, would not exist today without the contribution of those specific groups in society. So, what affirms the collective rights of First Nations in Canada? This is where we are going to get started with our next lesson. Before we do that, we have a word here that is affirm. What does that actually mean? Affirm means to state as fact, to express agreement, or to show commitment. It recognizes the founding people of Canada, and its roots come from that of Aboriginal, Francophone, and Anglophones in our history, in our land, in our story of Canada. This map here, you've seen this map. It's probably been a few years since you've seen this map. If you've been with me for a while now, you've seen this map from about 2 years ago. This is North America around the year 1713. We've got France represented there. We've got the English through Great Britain represented there. And we also have Spain at the bottom as well. Missing from this map, and you can go back to previous lessons, our Indigenous are not represented here. So what's the deal there? Well, we will be talking about that at the beginning of our next lesson in lesson 4.2. What I want you to do right now is head over to your notebooks and complete the questions for this part of the chapter.